I never imagined that sitting down in a busy cafe would change my life forever. But that's exactly what happened on a cold Tuesday afternoon in Seoul. The cafe was crowded, almost every seat taken. Students hunched over laptops, business people having hurried meetings, couples sharing desserts. The usual afternoon rush. I just finished a long job interview nearby and desperately needed coffee and a moment to breathe. My eyes scanned the room, searching for any available spot. That's when I saw him. A man sitting alone at a corner table, 2 empty chairs across from him. He wore a simple black jacket, nothing fancy. His face was partially hidden as he looked down at his phone. The table was tucked away, quiet, perfect. I didn't think twice. I walked over, my bag heavy on my shoulder, and gestured politely toward the empty chair. He glanced up briefly, his dark eyes meeting mine for just a second, then nodded. No smile, no words. Just a slight tilt of his head that I took as permission. I sat down, relieved to finally rest my aching feet. That's when I heard it. Soft laughter from the table next to us. Then whispers. I tried to ignore it, pulling out my phone, pretending I didn't notice. But the laughter grew louder, more obvious. A group of young men at the adjacent table were looking directly at us, smirking, nudging each other. One of them whispered something in Korean, and they all burst into laughter again. I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment, though I didn't understand why. What was so funny? I glanced at the man across from me. He hadn't moved. Hadn't looked up. His expression remained completely neutral, as if he couldn't hear them at all. But I could see the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers gripped his phone just a little tighter. More people started to notice. A woman at the counter glanced our way and whispered to her friend. An older couple near the window looked over, their eyebrows raised in surprise. The atmosphere shifted. The laughter wasn't just from one table anymore. It felt like the entire cafe was in on some joke I didn't understand. I felt humiliated. Had I done something wrong? Was I not supposed to sit here? I started to gather my things, ready to leave, when the man finally spoke. His voice was low, calm, almost gentle. He said something in Korean I didn't fully catch, but his tone made me pause. He wasn't asking me to leave. If anything, he seemed to be telling me to stay. I hesitated, caught between confusion and curiosity. Before I could decide, the cafe door swung open with force. The cheerful chime of the bell was drowned out by the sudden, heavy sound of boots on the tile floor. 3 men entered, dressed in immaculate black suits, their faces serious, almost intimidating. The laughter died instantly. The entire cafe fell silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned toward the door. The 3 men moved with precision, their eyes scanning the room until they locked onto our table. Then, in perfect unison, they walked directly toward us. My heart pounded. I had no idea what was happening, but every instinct told me I was in the middle of something dangerous. I gripped the edge of the table, ready to bolt if I needed to. But what happened next froze me in place. The 3 men stopped just a few feet away from our table. Then, slowly, deliberately, they bowed. Not a casual nod, but a deep, respectful bow. One of them spoke in Korean, his tone formal, almost reverent. I didn't need to understand the words to recognize respect when I saw it. The man across from me finally looked up. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. He acknowledged them with a single, barely perceptible nod. They straightened, standing at attention like soldiers awaiting orders. I looked around the cafe. Every face that had been laughing moments ago was now pale, eyes wide with shock. The group of young men who had mocked me earlier looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. The woman at the counter had her hand over her mouth. No one dared to make a sound. Reality crashed over me like ice water. This wasn't just some random man. This was someone powerful. Someone feared. And I, in my ignorance, had sat down across from him like he was nobody. If you've ever felt the weight of a room's attention shift from mockery to fear in seconds, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your story. The suited men remained standing, silent, waiting. The man across from me finally stood, buttoning his jacket with a slow, deliberate motion. He looked down at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than cold neutrality in his eyes. There was curiosity there. Maybe even amusement. He said something in Korean, his tone softer now, almost conversational. One of the suited men stepped forward and translated in English. His voice was polite but firm. The boss was asking if I was all right. If anyone had bothered me. I blinked, stunned. Of all the things I'd expected, concern wasn't one of them. I managed to shake my head, my voice barely a whisper. I said I was fine. Just confused. The man nodded once, then said something else. The translator spoke again. The boss wanted to know if I'd like to stay and finish my coffee in peace. He would make sure no one disturbed me. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to run, to get as far away from this situation as possible. But another part of me, the part that had been humiliated just minutes ago, felt a strange sense of vindication. These people had laughed at me for sitting with someone they thought was beneath notice. Now they couldn't even look in my direction. I found my voice and said yes. I would stay. The man's lips curved into the slightest hint of a smile. He gave another brief nod to his men, who immediately turned and positioned themselves near the door and along the walls of the cafe. They weren't leaving. They were standing guard. The man sat back down across from me, as calm as if nothing had happened. He picked up his phone again, scrolling through messages like this was just another Tuesday afternoon. I sat there, coffee untouched, trying to process what had just happened. The cafe remained deathly quiet for several long minutes. Then, slowly, cautiously, people began to whisper again. But this time, the whispers weren't directed at me. They were about him. I caught fragments of conversations in English and Korean. Words like dangerous, powerful, organization. And one word that kept repeating, Mafia. My stomach dropped. Mafia. Korean Mafia. I'd heard stories, of course. Everyone had. Organized crime groups that operated in the shadows, controlling everything from businesses to politicians. I'd always thought they were exaggerated, the stuff of movies and thrillers. But sitting here, watching the way people avoided even glancing in our direction, I realized those stories were real. And I was sitting across from one of their leaders. I should have been terrified. Any rational person would have been. But instead, I felt something else. A strange, inexplicable calm. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was exhaustion from the interview. Or maybe it was the way he'd asked if I was all right, the way he'd offered to protect me, a complete stranger, from mockery. I cleared my throat softly. He looked up from his phone, his dark eyes meeting mine again. I asked, in hesitant English, if he spoke my language. He nodded once. His English was accented but clear. He asked why I'd sat down at his table. I explained about the interview, the crowded cafe, the need for a seat. I told him I hadn't known who he was. I'd just seen an empty chair. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised me. He told me that most people in this city knew his face. They knew to keep their distance. But I hadn't. I'd treated him like a normal person. Like he was just another man having coffee. And that, he said, was rare. I didn't know how to respond to that. So I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since the suited men had arrived. I asked who he really was. He studied me for a long moment, as if deciding whether to answer. Then he told me his name. It meant nothing to me, but I saw the way the people around us tensed when they heard it. He explained, simply and without emotion, that he led one of the oldest and most influential organizations in Seoul. He didn't use the word Mafia, but he didn't need to. I should have left then. Made an excuse, thanked him for the seat, and walked out. But I didn't. Instead, I asked why someone like him was sitting alone in a cafe, without guards, without any sign of his status. He smiled then, a real smile, small but genuine. He said that even men in his position needed moments of normalcy. Moments where they could sit, have coffee, and not be surrounded by expectations and fear. He said that's why he came to this cafe sometimes, dressed simply, hoping to blend in. It rarely worked. If this story is pulling you in, show me with a like. It helps me know you're feeling this too. We talked for another 20 minutes. It was the strangest conversation I'd ever had. He asked about my interview, what kind of work I was looking for. I asked about his life, carefully, not wanting to overstep. He answered some questions, deflected others with practiced ease. He was intelligent, well-spoken, and surprisingly easy to talk to once the initial shock wore off. But the weight of who he was never fully left the room. The suited men remained posted like statues. Other customers finished their drinks quickly and left, unwilling to stay in the presence of someone so dangerous. New customers walked in, saw the scene, and immediately turned around. The cafe staff moved quietly, nervously, not daring to approach our table. Eventually, he glanced at his watch and said he needed to leave. Business to attend to. He stood, and his men immediately straightened, ready to move. But before he left, he did something unexpected. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Simple, black, with only a name and a phone number embossed in silver. He placed it on the table in front of me and said that if I ever needed help in this city, anything at all, I should call that number. No questions asked. I stared at the card, not sure if I should take it. He seemed to understand my hesitation. He said it wasn't a trap or a debt. Just an offer. Because I'd treated him like a person, not a title. And that was worth something to him. Then he left. The suited men followed in perfect formation. The door closed behind them, and the cafe seemed to exhale collectively. The tension drained from the room. People started talking again, louder now, excited, processing what they'd just witnessed. I sat there alone, staring at the business card on the table. My coffee was cold. My hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline finally catching up with me. I picked up the card, turning it over in my fingers. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to pretend this had never happened. But another part of me, the part that was still unemployed, still struggling in a foreign city, slipped it carefully into my wallet. I left the cafe shortly after, stepping out into the cold Seoul afternoon. The street was busy, people rushing past, oblivious to what had just happened inside. I walked slowly, my mind racing. I'd come to this city to start fresh, to build a new life. I never expected that life to intersect with someone like him. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that encounter. I told myself to forget it, to move on. But every time I opened my wallet and saw that card, I remembered the way people's laughter had turned to fear. The way he'd offered protection without being asked. The way he'd smiled when I'd treated him like he was normal. I didn't call the number. I had no reason to. My life continued as it had before. I went to more interviews, explored the city, tried to make friends. But Seoul felt different now. I found myself noticing things I'd missed before. Men in dark suits standing outside certain buildings. Businesses with no signs, but clearly successful. Whispered conversations that stopped when I got too close. I'd glimpsed a world that existed beneath the surface of this city. A world most people pretended not to see. 3 weeks later, everything changed. I'd finally landed a job at a small marketing firm. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a reason to stay. I was walking home late one evening after a team dinner, the streets quieter than usual. I took a shortcut through a narrow alley I'd used a dozen times before. Halfway through, I heard footsteps behind me. Fast, deliberate. I glanced back and saw 2 men following, their faces hidden in shadow. My heart jumped. I walked faster. They matched my pace. Panic started to set in. I emerged from the alley onto a busier street and felt a wave of relief. But when I looked back, the men were still there. Still following. I ducked into a convenience store, hoping they'd pass by. I pretended to browse the shelves, watching the door through the reflection in the refrigerator glass. They stopped outside. Waiting. The store clerk noticed and asked if I was okay. I lied and said yes, but my hands were trembling as I pulled out my phone. I didn't know who to call. The police? What would I even say? I'm being followed but nothing's happened yet. That's when I remembered the card. I transferred it to my phone case weeks ago, almost as a joke to myself. Now I stared at the number, my thumb hovering over the screen. Was I really about to do this? Call a Mafia boss because I felt unsafe. But what other choice did I have? I pressed dial. It rang once. Twice. Then a voice answered. Calm, professional, speaking Korean. I stammered out my name in English, said I'd met their boss at a cafe. I explained that I was being followed and didn't know what to do. There was a pause. Then the voice switched to English, suddenly much more alert. They asked where I was. I gave them the address of the convenience store. The voice told me to stay inside, stay visible, and not to leave under any circumstances. Help was coming. The call ended. I stood there, phone clutched in my hand, not sure if I'd just made things better or infinitely worse. 5 minutes passed. The 2 men outside were still there, occasionally glancing into the store. The clerk was watching me nervously now, clearly sensing something was wrong. Then I saw them. 2 black cars pulled up to the curb with precision. 4 men stepped out, and I recognized the suits immediately. The same kind the men at the cafe had worn. They approached the 2 men who'd been following me. There was a brief, tense conversation. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw the fear in the followers' faces. They left quickly, almost running. One of the suited men entered the store and approached me. He spoke in polite English, asking if I was hurt. I shook my head, still in shock. He said a car was waiting outside to take me home safely. I started to protest, to say I could take the subway, but he insisted. Orders from the boss. I followed him outside. The car was sleek, black, intimidating. The door was held open for me. I slid into the back seat, and we drove through the city in silence. The driver didn't ask for my address. Somehow, they already knew. When we arrived at my apartment building, the suited man handed me a phone. Not mine. A different one. He said the boss wanted to speak with me. I took it hesitantly and held it to my ear. His voice was the same as I remembered. Calm, controlled. He asked if I was safe now. I said yes, thanks to him. He told me that the men following me had been dealt with. They wouldn't bother me again. Then he asked if I was free tomorrow evening. There was something he wanted to discuss in person. Every instinct screamed at me to say no. To thank him and cut all ties. But curiosity won. I agreed. He gave me an address and told me a car would pick me up at 7. Then the call ended. I handed the phone back, and the suited man left without another word. I stood outside my building, watching the car disappear into the night. What had I just gotten myself into? If you're hooked and want to see where this goes, subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The next evening, I changed clothes 4 times. What do you wear to meet a mafia boss? I settled on something simple and professional, trying not to overthink it. At exactly 7, a car arrived. Same sleek black exterior. Same silent driver. We drove for 30 minutes, leaving the busy city center and heading toward the outskirts. We pulled up to a traditional Korean estate, hidden behind tall walls and heavy gates. The gates opened automatically, and we drove through manicured gardens lit by soft lanterns. It was beautiful, almost serene. Not what I'd expected from someone in his line of work. I was escorted inside by a woman in a formal hanbok. She led me through elegant hallways decorated with traditional art and modern sculptures. Everything was meticulously maintained, a blend of old and new. She stopped at a set of double doors, knocked softly, then opened them. He was standing by a floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the garden. He turned when I entered, and for the first time, I saw him in his element. He wore a tailored suit, his hair styled perfectly. He looked every bit the powerful man he was. But when he smiled in greeting, it was the same small, genuine smile from the cafe. He thanked me for coming and gestured to a low table where tea had been prepared. We sat across from each other, the formality of the setting making me acutely aware of the cultural and power gap between us. He poured tea with practiced grace and asked how I was settling into Seoul. We talked for a while about inconsequential things. My job, the city, cultural differences. He was a good conversationalist, asking thoughtful questions, listening intently. But I knew this wasn't why he'd asked me here. Eventually, I asked directly. Why had he invited me? He set down his tea and looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. He said that he'd been thinking about our encounter at the cafe. About how rare it was to meet someone who didn't see him as a symbol or a threat, but simply as a person. He said that in his world, genuine connections were nearly impossible. Everyone wanted something. Everyone had an agenda. But I hadn't. I just needed a seat. And when I'd called for help, it wasn't to manipulate or leverage his power. It was because I was scared and had no one else to turn to. That kind of honesty was valuable to him. Rare. He told me he wanted to offer me a position. Not in his organization, he clarified quickly, seeing my alarm. But as a cultural consultant for his legitimate businesses. Many of his companies dealt with international clients, and they needed someone who understood both Eastern and Western perspectives. Someone trustworthy. I was stunned. This wasn't what I'd expected at all. I asked why he thought he could trust me. We'd spoken for less than an hour total. He said that trust wasn't built on time, but on character. And he was a good judge of character. It had kept him alive this long. The offer was generous. Very generous. More money than I'd make in years at my current job. But it came with an unspoken understanding. Working for him, even in a legitimate capacity, meant entering his world. It meant being associated with everything that came with his name. I asked for time to think about it. He nodded, saying he expected nothing less. He had a car take me home, and I spent the entire ride staring out the window, my mind spinning. Over the next week, I wrestled with the decision. I researched his businesses. On the surface, they were legitimate. Real estate, import-export, entertainment. But everyone knew what lay beneath. I asked myself if I could live with that. If the money and opportunity were worth the compromise. In the end, I realized I'd already made my choice the moment I took his card. The moment I called for help. I'd already stepped into his world. The question wasn't whether to enter, but how far I was willing to go. I called the number and accepted the position. Within days, I was moved to a better apartment, given a company car, and introduced to a team of professionals who treated me with respect but also a certain wariness. They knew who I'd been hired by. They knew what it meant. My job was exactly as described. I consulted on international marketing campaigns, helped navigate cultural differences in business deals, attended meetings with foreign investors. It was legitimate work, and I was good at it. But I couldn't ignore the reality of who signed my paychecks. I saw him occasionally at company events. He was always polite, always professional. We never spoke about that night I was followed or the conversation at his estate. It was as if we'd reached an unspoken agreement. I would do my job well, and he would ensure I was protected and respected. Months passed. I grew more comfortable in my role, even began to enjoy it. I made friends among the staff, explored more of Seoul, saved money for the first time in my life. It felt like I'd finally found stability. But I learned quickly that stability in his world was an illusion. One evening, I was working late at the office when I heard shouting from the executive floor. Security rushed past my door. Alarms I didn't know existed started blaring. I grabbed my phone, unsure whether to leave or hide. Then he appeared in my doorway, flanked by guards. His expression was hard, colder than I'd ever seen. He told me to come with him immediately. No explanation. I didn't ask questions. I just followed. We were taken to a secure location, an underground facility I hadn't known existed beneath the building. He explained quickly. There had been a breach. A rival organization had leaked information and was planning an attack on several of his properties. This office was a potential target. Everyone was being evacuated to secure locations until the threat was neutralized. I was kept there for 3 days. The facility was surprisingly comfortable, with bedrooms, kitchens, and entertainment areas. But the armed guards at every exit made it clear we were prisoners of circumstance. I saw sides of his organization I'd been sheltered from before. The weapons. The surveillance technology. The cold efficiency with which threats were discussed and eliminated. On the 3rd day, he came to see me personally. He looked exhausted, his suit jacket gone, sleeves rolled up. He apologized for the disruption and said it was safe to return to the surface. The threat had been handled. I asked what that meant. Handled. He looked at me for a long moment, then said simply that I didn't want to know the details. Some things were better left in the shadows. I realized then, truly realized, what world I was part of. Not just the polished businesses and legitimate fronts, but the violence and darkness that protected them. He must have seen the fear in my eyes because his expression softened. He asked if I wanted out. If this was too much. He said he would understand if I chose to leave. He would ensure I was compensated and protected, even if I walked away. I thought about it. Really thought about it. About the girl who'd sat down in a cafe just looking for a place to rest. About how far I'd come since then. About the choice I'd made to step into this world. And I realized I didn't want to leave. Not because of the money or the security, but because I'd found something here I hadn't expected. Purpose. Respect. A place where I mattered. Yes, it came with shadows. But didn't everywhere. I told him I was staying. His relief was visible, though he tried to hide it. He thanked me, then said something that surprised me. He said that having someone in his life who'd chosen to be there, not out of fear or obligation but genuine choice, meant more than I could understand. Our relationship shifted after that. We began having dinner occasionally, talking about more than just business. He told me about his childhood, about how he'd inherited this role he never wanted but had learned to wield with precision. I told him about my life before Seoul, my dreams, my fears. We never labeled what we were becoming. It wasn't romance, though there was something deeper than friendship growing between us. It was partnership. Understanding. Two people from completely different worlds who'd found common ground in the most unlikely place. The cafe encounter that had started as mockery and shock had evolved into something neither of us could have predicted. I'd walked into his life by accident, and somehow, I'd chosen to stay. Seoul no longer felt foreign. This life, strange as it was, had become mine. And the man everyone feared, the one people wouldn't dare look in the eye, had become someone I trusted completely. Sometimes I think about those people in the cafe who laughed. Who thought I was foolish for sitting beside him. I wonder what they'd think if they knew the whole story. If they knew that the moment they mocked had changed everything. But I don't dwell on it. I've learned from him that the opinions of others matter far less than the choices we make for ourselves. And I chose this. Every complicated, dangerous, unexpected part of it. This is my life now. And I wouldn't change a single moment.